I'm going to mix this track without hearing it at all. So I won't be able to listen to it, but you'll be able to hear what I'm doing in real time. I'll be using visual cues and different analyzers to try and make this mix sound good without actually being able to hear what I'm doing. This is to show you how useful visual aids can be in the mixing process, and to not only rely on your ears when you're mixing, but also use your eyes to help you make mixing decisions. At the end of the day, whatever sounds best is usually what you should go for, but sometimes we miss things, and using visuals can help us actually spot those problems in our mix, or help us just make better mixing decisions. The way that I'm going to be doing this is by using a spectrum analyzer to balance my mixing decisions against an already mixed and mastered professional track. So I'm gonna place my headphones over here, volume on my monitors are all the way down, and I'm gonna get started with the mix. But before I do, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you like this video, give me the thumbs up, it helps out the channel tremendously. The way that I know how to do this is through years of practice producing, mixing, and mastering tracks. I've picked up on common details, common settings, and things to look out for when balancing a track properly for a mixdown. Let's hope this doesn't suck, and let's start the process. When setting up your mixdown, you usually bring all of the levels down to 0 or down to no volume, and then you bring up each individual level, starting with the most important element first. Kick drum, then usually the bass, then the drums, and then the synths. In my mixer, I have my kick, my bass, my drums, and then my synths all in their own group, so I can add my own group processing, and I can adjust those groups individually if I need to balance them after the individual layers. Then I have 3 reference tracks, and the way that I'm actually going to do this mixdown is by using reference tracks to balance my track against them, because I know they're professional tracks, they're mastered, they're mixed properly. I'm going to use those levels as a reference point against my track so that I know that I'm at least balancing pretty accurately to those professionally mixed and mastered tracks. There's a certain way that I have to do it because it's already mastered, so I'll show you that after I show you the setup. So all the levels are down to 0 volume. You'll notice that I have 6 dB pushed up on the master chain, and this is just to make sure at the end of the mixdown that I can pull that 6 dB back down to 0, and I for sure have at least 6 dB of headroom. It's not necessary, it's just something that I do, and it just allows me to make sure that at the end of the mixdown, even if I'm getting close to only about -6 dB, I can pull that back down another 6 dB and give myself extra headroom. I've taken off all the mix processing on every channel. If there's any processing on it, it's just there to actually use for sound design, but I've taken off all the EQ, compression, sidechain, everything. I'm going to be doing this mixdown only by using my eyes. Lastly, on the master channel, I have the visual aids I'm going to use to actually balance this track. I have the Unity loudness meter to measure the perceived loudness, the Voxengo span, which is going to be my best friend in this mixdown, and then I have adapter metric AB, which is a paid plugin, which is basically a fancier version of the Ulean span and a couple other different things that I'm going to potentially use to make sure that my track is balanced against this one. Okay, now let's get started on the actual mixdown. I guess I don't really need these. I'm going to start with the most important element first, which is the kick drum, which will also be the main reference point for the rest of the mixdown. So I'm going to bring the kick drum up until I'm hitting at about -18 decibels full scale. The peak volume is getting close to -18, and right about there is -18. Right there, -17.5. I want to make sure that the RMS is also very close to the peak volume. Bright green is the RMS and the dark green is the peak volume. So I want to make sure that they are close together. If they aren't close together, it might look more like this. And that means that there's a strong peak in the sample, and you probably want to address that with some EQ, compression, or limiting, or clipping. I'm going to bring that back. All my channels will have an EQ and compressor on them, but they won't be adjusted yet. I just left them on to save some time instead of dragging them onto each individual channel. We're hitting at about -17.5. The RMS is probably hitting at about -24, -23.5. That's pretty close. I'm pretty happy with that, but I want to make it a little bit closer. So I'm going to grab a drum bus, which is great for throwing on your kick drums. And I'll dial the dry wet down a little bit because I find it's pretty aggressive, but the drum bus has a limiter in it already. So this probably already will bring our RMS up a little bit, and it has up to about 23. Maybe I'll push the drive up a little more. And I'm hoping that sounds okay, but now I'm up to about 22 RMS. So I know that it's a little bit closer to the peak volume I've probably reduced by compressing or limiting with the drum bus. And now that I have this reference point of about 16.4 on the peak volume. This is how I can use span to reference the professionally mixed and mastered track as my reference point. I'll go into the reference track and I'm going to bring that down by that volume. I'll bring them all down by 16.5. This is because the kick is the loudest part of the track. So if the track is mastered, then the loudest peak of the track is going to always most likely be the kick drum. So I know now that the kick drum of the reference tracks are brought down to the same volume as my kick drum. And now I can start to use that as a reference point. Turn on the reference track and you can see that the kick drums are actually pretty close. Now I know that I'm using this reference track as a good point to start making decisions based on my mix visually, as well as if I could hear it, I would use that too. Another way of doing this is by actually just checking to see. So I can choose here this low pass filter and I can just solo the low end and see if the loudness is similar. So I have around negative 27.5 loudest units full scale for my track. Next, I'll move on to the sub frequencies, which usually I like to bring up between 3 and 8 decibels quieter than the kick drum. I'll bring that sub up until I'm hitting at about maybe negative 20, 21, because the sub is routed into the bass group and then the bass group goes to the master. So it could be a little bit different in volume. So I'm hitting at about negative 20 here. The RMS is pretty close. I'm pretty happy with that. It's about 4 or 5 dB quieter than the kick. That's a pretty safe bet. Of course, I want to add some sidechain compression, so I'm going to open up the sidechain from the kick group and I'll pull that down. I'm aiming between 6 and maybe even 12 dB of gain reduction. It's obviously not hard to hear, but you want to go until you can basically hear the pumping effect and then back off about 10 or 15% so you don't hear it, but you kind of feel when it's not there. And then if you pull this down too fast, you sometimes get a click or a pop. I don't know if you are, but a lot of the time I hear with my students when they are sidechaining, they do get this little clicking sound, and to alleviate that, you increase the attack a little bit and then it won't sidechain so fast and you won't get that little click or pop. Probably sounds like this. We have the kick and the sub. Let's actually look at the loudness based off of the reference track. So I go here and I do this every time that I'm mixing a track and actually able to hear it. That's why I have this mixing rack set up, which you can get on my Patreon. I put this into a low pass. I'm filtering out all the high end. I'm just focusing on the low end of the track. I'm going to listen to the reference track and see how loud that is. Hitting at about 28.5 dB, 26 dB, and 27.5. So each of these tracks are teetering between 26.5 and maybe 28. So if my track is in that ballpark, then I know that I'm at a good point. So then I can solo just my track. And it looks like it's about 26.8, which is pretty good. Maybe it's a little bit too loud. So I will just back off the kick or the bass just slightly. Again, I do this while I'm mixing too. This is not just for the visual mix down that I'm doing now. I do this every time I mix a track. I balance my kick and bass. I listen to reference tracks. I check how it's going against those. And then I check to see the loudness overall, because our ears play tricks on us and it's better to use the tools we have to see maybe we're not listening properly, or maybe our decision based only on our ears is actually, not that it's wrong, but maybe it could be better. So I use these tools to do that. And that's all I'm trying to teach in this video. So now we have that. Let's go on to the next sound, which is the bass pluck. And I also probably have some low end in here, which I don't need. But first I'll bring it up in volume so you can hear it a little bit. And then I'm going to, of course, EQ out the low end. And I want to use, I like to use 2 filters. I like to use a strong ×4 filter, but sometimes we get some phase problems by doing this. So I'm going to use a second filter to kind of ease off that a little bit. It also sounds more natural this way. And I want to look at the sub frequency and figure out what frequencies we have here. So because I have some drive on this, I think that there is some high end coming through. So I'm going to make sure that I also cut that out. And oh boy, I don't know if I should use this warmth of the sub or this bass pluck. I'm going to actually pull the drive down because I don't know. I'm going to back this down until I'm hitting about here. I don't want to have this second and third octave. I just want maybe sub and then this bass coming through. And then again, I'm going to add that second kind of not so aggressive filtering like this. And on this one, I'm going to make sure. So if I go back to the sub, I can see that frequency is 71.5 hertz. So I can go back to the bass pluck, and I don't want these to overlap too much. 71.5 is here. I'm cutting out quite a bit of that. Pretty confident that's going to sound okay. And then maybe I'll tone down a little bit of the high end that I'm assuming is there. There is a pluck, and we probably don't need too much in the top end. And then usually these sounds can get a little bit muddy, so maybe I'll just reduce a little bit of like the 200 to 300 range, because that's where a lot of mud usually accumulates. If I take out too much, it starts to sound thin, so I have to be careful with that. Volume now, I haven't even done the volume. I'm gonna bring that to a bit lower than what the sub is playing at, so I'm gonna focus on these two levels here. And I'm realizing that looks pretty quiet, and I think that I didn't realize my sub is quite quiet now that I've kind of EQ'd that and added the compression. So I'm gonna push that up a bit more. Push that up till we're getting about negative 24. Yeah, maybe I did that by mistake, but this is negative 25 now, so it's still pretty quiet. Let's get up to like negative 23. That should be pretty close to the volume of the kick, and we have here like negative 25, maybe even a little louder. And that should be closer. Oh, maybe it's too loud. I'd rather go a little bit quieter than a little bit louder, and then I can push this up a little bit more. I usually aim for these to not be as loud as the sub, because you want your sub and your kick to be really loud. Bass top. I'm trying to remember what these sounds are. Okay, so let's go EQ. This corpus is for the sound design. It's adding like a little, well, I don't even know what it's adding anymore, but I'm sure it's adding some sort of little effect. You can see that it has that same frequency that the bass and the bass pluck have. I don't need that, so I'm just gonna back that off. Of course, I would love to hear how much I'm taking out here, but I wanna make sure that I'm taking out a lot of it, so I'm gonna do that double filtering again. Like this. Nope, other way around. And there we go. You can see that most of it's gone now. Maybe some saturation on here. How am I doing so far? Hopefully I'm doing well. And I'm sorry if you can't hear as I'm pushing this up. Let me turn this up a little bit. You can hear saturator's doing. I'll probably keep it the same volume as this one. And then I have this perky bass top. I'll bring that up to about the same volume as these, lower than the sub. It looks like it's pretty peaky. I can see that it's a really high peak volume and low RMS. I mean, about a halfway RMS. There's some filtering on here, which is adding a bit of sound. Let's take out the low end. And maybe I'll take out a little bit of the high end so it's not so punchy. And then maybe I'll throw a saturator on there as well, because saturation works very similar to a compressor, where it actually will increase the RMS. And let's pull that down a little bit. Hopefully that sounds good. Maybe I'll compress it. This is going to be weird compressing it without being able to see it, but I'm just going to try and grab some of those peaks. I can see that I'm grabbing them. And sure, 2 dB. I kind of want to listen to it. I'm not going to, but I just kind of want to. Okay, that's the bass. Hopefully it sounds good. And now what I'm going to do is reference one more time. Make sure that it's looking good with span. And it looks like maybe the sub is a little loud. Let me just solo just the reference, just mine. And I want to make sure that the sub is, okay, that's actually looking pretty good. Yeah, that's looking pretty good. It looks like there's not a lot of bass in this section here, the 150 area. Maybe I can push that up a little bit. So I'm going to go into my bass pluck. And 150 here. Maybe I'll just push that up a bit because I want some warmth. And I usually find that's where a lot of the warmth sits. Okay, let's move on to the drums. That'll be a good time to remind you that if you like the video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And if you want to support me directly, you can support me on Patreon, and the link for that is also in the description below. Okay, moving on to the drums. This is hopefully going to make it sound much better and be more interesting to listen to as I'm mixing. Usually I also mix in mono, but because I can't hear it, it doesn't really matter too much. But the hat is going to give us this other reference point against the reference track. So if I go back to the reference track and I turn that underlay back on, as soon as you see that high end coming through quite a bit on the reference track, that's gonna be a good point. So I'll move this, where am I gonna move this? I'll move this over here, and I'm gonna bring that hi-hat up. And I'm just going to basically try to bring it up till I see that it's about the same volume here, which looks like it's getting there. It's a little bit louder. Maybe I'll pull it down a little bit, especially because I know I'm bringing in more layers. So yeah, let me bring that down. We're hitting at about negative, pretty high, negative 22. I don't have any compression or anything on it yet. So let's keep this open. Maybe I'll make it a little bit smaller. I'll move this over here a little bit so we can see. And because I'm bringing in more layers, shakers, and things, I'm assuming that hat might be a little bit loud. So let me just pull it down a little bit more. The accents, I want to make sure I EQ this as well. I like to cut out the low end of my hats, and I usually go to about 1,000 area. I don't want to take out too much because then it gets a little bit thin. I usually go until it starts to sound thin and then back off about 10 or 15%. I'll go till here. It doesn't look like it's too sharp, so that's good. I don't think I need to take off anything from the high end. Let's move into the accents. These I'm assuming are like the little, I think they're like the little shaker accents. They kind of complement the hats. Maybe I'll turn this one off and just focus on, they look pretty sharp around here, but this hat doesn't really have that sharpness up there. So I kind of, I think it's gonna fill up that gap a little bit. Let me throw an EQ on here. Maybe tame those, it's really high. I'm gonna tame it a little bit with some filtering. And maybe I'll keep that a little bit quiet. Well, I mean, it looks a little bit quieter. Maybe I'll just, it's probably just, I'm focusing on filling up the EQ spectrum. That's really important to do. You want to make sure that things aren't overlapping too much. And because this hat is filling up this space down here and this accent shaker is filling up the space above it, I think that they can be a little bit closer in volume. So I'll try that. Next is the hard shakers. This is filling up that same spot. I'd rather have them a little bit quieter than louder. The wood shakers, the EQ looks fine on that. The wood shakers, I think, have a percussion. Yeah, I can see that it has like some sort of percussive. It looks like it's pretty bright. It's like really high up there, so I'm gonna filter that out as well. I don't really need that shrill high end in so much. It takes up some space and it just makes it kind of ear piercing. So looking pretty balanced towards the reference track still. Let's bring that up in volume. And moving on to the clap. Clap is going to be a bit more mid-present. Oh, I forgot my EQ is on there, my overdrive, so I'll take those off. And I have quite a few clap layers here. I have two playing, and then I have another accent one, then I have a first one. It just makes the clap sound a little bit different on the second hit, just to add some variation. I'm assuming the clap has to be about the same volume as the shakers and the hats, so I'm just freeballing here, and then some EQ at the end. This is where the punchiness of the clap sits. So maybe I'll just dial that back a little bit. I don't want it to be kind of muddy. And then the high end, let me throw an overdrive on there. I like to put overdrives on claps and snares because it like brightens them up. So I usually put it up here and I'll dial in like 10 or 20%. Oh gosh, hopefully this doesn't sound terrible. Balance is still good, maybe a little bit brighter than the reference track. Let me check out the other ones. Yeah, it looks good. Yeah, that looks good too. So I can trust that I'm balancing properly so far. Maybe my track has a little bit too much of this area, but we're gonna find out when I listen to it at the end. The hard percussions, I'm just gonna bring these up. I don't know what they sound like. I'll keep them, but it's a little bit quieter than the clap. And I must have left the EQ on there, so I'm just gonna leave it on. I think I forgot to take off some things. Yep, right here as well. So you're just seeing that I'm taking out the low end. I don't need that low end in percussion like this because I already have it in my bass instruments, and there's a lot of low end rumble and stuff with these types of percussion. I mean, I'm assuming if it's not that low end. Put this up. Background one shots, I'm just gonna do the same thing. Just bring it up to here. I have some reverb and auto panning just for the sound design aspect of it, I guess. And finally, I'm going to go into the drum group and I'm going to just throw a glue compressor on here. The glue compression there to just add a little bit of glue to the drums. So I usually aim for between 2 and 5 dB, and then I push that up for a little bit more than I'm compressing for. You see the red light coming on here, just make sure to click on the soft button, you're clipping, and then it'll turn it into a soft clipper. And the reverb is just for some automation build that I have later in the track. Oh, actually, one more thing I forgot to do is one of the shakers should probably have some like width to it. So maybe I can put some has effect on this shaker here. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good, right? I don't know. Couldn't tell you. Okay, so next we have the synths, and I like to throw a track spacer on the synths. Track spacer is a sidechain compression tool. It is awesome. I highly recommend it. I want to choose kick rack. When the kick is playing, it's going to reduce just like a regular sidechain compressor, but I'm going to pull this down so it's only compressing below 192, but only focuses on the low end. I'm not compressing. Oh, let me go a little higher, like 400, and just a little bit. This gives, yeah, maybe a little higher. This gives it like a pulsing effect, but it doesn't really interfere with everything else. And then I usually double this up, so I know for sure that any low end is being compressed. That might be in the synths. And then actually for the first one, I'm gonna bring this all the way up and just do like a light sidechain, like barely noticeable, just to give a bit more room to that kick in the high end. And then the low, any lows that I might run into up to like 300 or 400, I'll compress a little bit harder. I will also do that for the drums. So I don't want to do this every time, but just to be safe with some heavy percussion. And I'll just do like, yeah. Lastly, I'm going to do the synths. I can't hear the synths. This is going to be tricky, but what I'm going to do is just assume that it sounds good. The Atmos, I'm going to bring up just to kind of fill the spectrum a little bit. So let me go back to the track where the atmospheres are actually playing. They are playing over here in this final drop. So let me just turn them up in here. Where is it? Atmos. There we go. Sure. I know they're going to be a little bit quieter in the background. The piano is the main part of this track. At least this like condensed version of it. I've taken some of the synths and stuff off to make this a little bit faster of a process. But and then the white noise. Where's the white noise coming in? I want to make sure that's not too loud. It looks like it might be. This is tricky, but I'm going to try and use the span to kind of gauge. White noise looks pretty loud there, so I'm going to turn that down. White noise. Better. A piano. That could probably be a little bit louder. Ooh, probably too loud. Sorry. And then what I want to do with the EQ of the piano is I want to make sure that I'm focusing on two parts. There is this body that comes through that sounds really nice on a piano, but it also adds a bit of muddiness. So you either have to push that up or take it down. And then the opposite is either to push up the kind of brightness of the piano or to dull it a little bit. So I'm going to try and push up the brightness and bring down the dullness like that. I wonder if I've made any mistakes so far in like literally clicking solo on something and like not even hearing that it's not playing or it's too loud or I don't know, but it's I'm sure I did. So last we had the atmospheres. Throw an EQ on there. Make sure I'm pulling up the low end. I don't need low end there. And the low end removed on the effects because a lot of effects tend to have low end buildup, impacts, risers and stuff. They can have a lot of low end. And I want to turn these up. Probably turn them up not too loud. Who knows? And we're basically done. And now I'm gonna probably just take a quick listen and show you what it sounds like if I were to take a few minutes and just fine tune all these things and make sure that it sounds actually pretty good. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching this. Probably not very great mix down, but I think this deserves a like on the video because this was really bizarre to do. By the way, if you are serious about music production and you are wanting to learn at a faster pace, then definitely check out the links in the description below. I have music production courses as well as coaching available, and both are really great ways to increase the quality of your music very quickly. Although I can't hear it, I know that the atmospheres and the piano probably play at the same time right about here. So I want to actually duck down the atmospheres while the piano is playing. So I'm going to go into the Atmos, grab a track spacer or a compressor, whatever sidechain compression tool you have, and choose the piano. So number 25, piano. This means that when the piano is playing, it's actually going to turn down the atmospheres. And this just makes room for the piano to play while the atmosphere has those overlapping frequencies. And you can do this with EQ as well, but I like using track spacer because it only does it when the sounds are playing. One more time, I'm gonna check Voxengo span. They're looking pretty good. Maybe my kick and bass are, actually they look pretty good. Now I'm going to check the overall loudness of the track. I'm going to compare my mix at full mastered volume by using a limiter. So I see here that I'm at about -6 dB full scale of headroom. So I can pull that 6 dB down that I pushed up at the beginning of the mix. And now I'm at about -12. Just gave myself a little bit of extra wiggle room. I'm going to pull down this threshold of this maximizer limiter, and it's going to bring the volume of my track up to a semi-mastered level. And what I'm looking for is that the Ulean loudness meter is at about -10 or minus 10 loudness units full scale. I'm hitting at about negative 10.5. That's a pretty good spot to be. I can turn off my limiter. And now what I'm gonna do is bring the volume of these ones back to 0 and bring this group down by the amount that I used on the threshold. So negative 13.7. That means that these reference tracks are gonna be the same volume as my master track because they're brought down by 13.7 and then pushed through the limiter and turned back up by 13.7. So they should be the same volume and I should get a basic similar looking waveform here, which I do. And we should get a loudness of about negative 10.5 on the reference tracks as well. Okay, so they're a little bit louder in the reference tracks. Maybe negative 9. So maybe I can actually compress mine a little bit harder, but I aim usually when I master to about negative 9.5, negative 10.5. So I'm pretty close to the reference track with the mastering tool on. And now what I want to look for is, even if I wasn't using this reference track, I usually use span to just look to see what my waveform looks like. The kick drum usually hits between about negative 40 and negative 34. Then you have your high end, usually your hi-hats, your shakers. For this style of music, you usually have those a few dB quieter. So if you look and just kind of go across with this, you can see that my drums are just a little bit lower in volume than the bass and the kick are in this spectrum. Next, I want to pay attention to the second and third octave of bass. So maybe I can turn my kick off. And when I turn my kick off, the sub should be hitting around here, maybe just like about a little over halfway, almost 3/4 of what the kick is hitting. Most of the time. Of course, every track is different. And then you want to pay attention to the layers of bass that you have, the different octaves. So you have your sub bass around here, and then you have a second octave. I don't really have like a third octave that's too loud. Maybe I should bring that up a little bit so it sounds a bit more full in the track, but let me take a look at the bass itself. So we're dealing with 35 hertz. So at 35, we have one, and then at 70, we have another. So we're 70 here. Maybe 72. Oh, about 75. We have the second octave, which we can see here. And then we have the next octave at about 150, 160, which looks like it's about here. That one's a bit quiet. Maybe we could actually push that one up a little bit and give you more of that warmth. But of course, it's hard to gauge without actually hearing it. But that's what I'm looking for when I'm using the spectrum analyzer, mixing my tracks with and without the reference points. We can see maybe in the reference track here, we can see that we have the sub. We see that we have the second octave of bass here. Maybe the third octave is a bit quieter. Try out a different one. Same thing here. We have the kick and the sub, the other octave of bass, and the last one here. Those bass octaves are a little bit louder, but the sub is always loudest, and then the hi-hats are just a little bit quieter. And a nice strong kick like this is usually preferred as well. You can really see the shape of that hill of the kick drum. Let's take a listen together to what it actually sounds like. I'm gonna put my headphones on, and I'm actually quite excited to hear how this panned out. I mean, it could be worse. Why is this clipping so much? Oh, it's recording. Okay, you know what? Maybe a bit better than I expected. The kick doesn't really punch through as well as I'd hoped it would. The bass feels a bit muddy, and the synths overall are a bit muddy as well. Well, I think the atmospheres are just a little bit too loud, and the piano is just a little bit hidden behind the rest of the track. So I'm gonna very quickly go over and just balance this mix in real time so you can see how I would fix this. The kick and bass are pretty well balanced. The sub's probably just a smidgen too loud. On the bass channel itself, I wanted to actually put a track spacer and compress the whole track. That way I get like a little bit of pumping as well. So you're getting that side chain from all of these instruments, all of the layers of the kick. And only when the kick's playing do I want that. Just a little bit of a pulse. But on the sub itself, I have extra as well. So it's compressing the low end more, but then the rest of the sound is compressing a bit. These actually sound pretty good. Volume-wise, this one's a bit loud. A bit muddy. It's got that resonant. Yeah, I do not like that sound, so I'm going to pull that down. Specifically that one resonant note. That's better. And that's kind of giving a bit of mud. So I'm going to push up the grittiness of this. Oh, that helped a lot. The drums are actually pretty well balanced too. Push up the hat, maybe 1 or 2 dB. Actually, not too bad. You know what? I'm surprised that this sounded this good. I mean, I'm not surprised. Clap can be a bit louder. But overall, like just a little bit of fine tuning of the volumes. That sounds pretty good. The synths. Gain up a little bit. And that sound there, this atmosphere, wherever it is, this one. Or is it this one? Yeah, it's just too loud. Now I check my U-lean. We can probably push the maximizer up a little bit more. All in all, the mixdown didn't sound too bad. Using visual cues is very helpful for making mixing decisions, but always rely on your ears over your eyes, because after all, the person listening to your music will not be able to see what you're doing, but only hear what you've made. These visual cues have been super helpful in mixing this track, but if you want to focus more on the low end, which is obviously super important, then check out this video right here where I use the same techniques, but focusing solely on the low end, or click this video right here, which YouTube actually thinks that you'll like.